just cover the basics. What I've used, just for your information, is an AI to go over a whole suite of documents, including the BDQ Core Standard documentation draft, our paper in 2020, and a series of annual reports that I put into the executive. And I set the AI loose on that and asked it to produce a conversation, which you will now hear. It's about 15 minutes long, and then it'll be just over to you guys for any questions that might arise. Just let me know how it sounds, but in theory it
You
should.
know, you've likely stumbled across mountains of biodiversity data in your work, or even just out of sheer curiosity. It's everywhere, right? Museum records, citizen science
Oh,
stuff.
absolutely. There's just a ton of it out there.
But here's the thing, the real challenge. How do you actually know what's good? What data can you actually trust? How do you cut through all that noise and find what's genuinely useful for what you need?
That is precisely the problem, isn't it? The volume is one thing, but figuring out if that data is actually fit for your specific purpose. That's the key, whether you're, say, a researcher modeling species or a conservationist looking at habitats.
Right. So that's what we're digging into today, something called biodiversity data quality, BDQ for short, and specifically the work TDWG Biodiversity Information Standards is doing. We're focusing on this proposed standard called BDQ Core.
Yeah, think of BDQ Core as trying to create a clearer, more consistent way to size up this data, to assess its fitness for use, as we say.
And for someone listening, why does this matter? How does BDQ Core help them?
Well, ideally, it saves you time. Less time wrestling with data that might be dodgy, and a lot more confidence that the insights you get are actually reliable. It's about making the data work for you properly.
Okay, and we're basing this deep dive on the latest info, right?
We are. Our main source is the brand new TG2 report from 2025. So it's the freshest take on where BDQ Core stands.
And TG2, that's task group 2. They didn't start from scratch, did they?
No, not at all. They really built on the work of other TDWG groups. TG1 handled the conceptual framework first. TG3 looked at use cases, how people actually use the data. And all that work together actually spurred the creation of TG4, which deals with all the necessary vocabularies. It's been quite the collaborative effort.
A real group project. So for this deep dive, what's the plan? Where are we going?
Okay, so we'll break it down into four main chunks. First, we'll look at the history. How did Task Group 2 even come about? Then, the foundations, what's BTQ Core built on? Third, the structure, what does it actually contain? And finally, the big one. What does this all mean for everyone creating and using this data?
Sounds good. Let's start with that history then. Task Group 2. It kicked off, you mentioned, around the TDWG 2010 conference. What was the initial spark?
Yeah, it's interesting. The original idea, pushed quite a bit by Lee Belbin, was actually pretty practical. It was about transparency. The thinking was major data aggregators, like, say, GBIF, should publicly show the rules they use to flag potential problems in records.
Ah, so users could see why something was flagged.
Exactly. To help them understand the data's limits, its strengths.
Yeah.
Just be more informed.
But that specific vision didn't quite happen that way, which led to TG2.
Right. The idea evolved. But the core need better ways to handle and understand data quality that definitely stuck around. So TG2 was officially formed in 2014, and its first name was actually a bit broader. Task Group 2, Tools, Services, and Workflows.
Tools, services, and workflows. Okay, so what were they aiming for back then, say early 2017?
The goals were pretty ambitious then. They wanted to identify the actual tests and assertions the big data providers were using, figure out the principles behind those tests, document the software tools people were using, leaning heavily on GBI setup, and, get some foundational papers out there.
And the big goal?
The really big goal was to submit a standard set of tests and assertions to TDWG by August 2018, which turned out to be optimistic.
Hey, yeah, sounds like it. Who were these key data providers they looked at initially?
The 2025 report mentions they started by looking at places like the Atlas of Living Australia, ALA, GBIF, of course, IDIC-Bio, CRIA, and Bison. Those were the main ones whose quality checks were examined early on.
And you said the group's focus, even its name, shifted more towards tests and assertions. Why that change?
That was a key realization, really. They figured out that the actual tests you run on the data and the assertions you make about its quality based on those tests, those are more fundamental, more stable than the specific software tools or the exact workflows people use.
Oh, the tools might change, but the underlying test logic stays the same.
Precisely. Tools and workflows depend on those tests. So it made sense to focus on nailing down that core part first. the what before the how, essentially.
It sounds like this task, which might seem simple on the surface, just list the tests, right?
Yeah.
Turned out to be way more complex. The report mentions unexpected complexity.
Oh, definitely. It wasn't just listing things. I mean, one of the earlier reports, I think 2019, mentioned getting up to 32 comments on a single test during development.
32 comments per test.
Yeah. It just shows the level of detail, the different viewpoints, the rigorous debate needed to get everyone on the same page and standardize these things properly.
That's incredible dedication. And who are the key people steering this ship through all that complexity?
The report credits a core team. Lee Belbin, as the convener, was central. Then Arthur Chapman, Paul Morris, and John Witzorek were major contributors throughout. It also gives a nod to important early work by Alex Thompson and Paul Zermolio, and more recent input from Yiming Gan. It really highlights that sustained collaborative effort.
It really does, and it's clearly been a long road. Can you give us the potted history of how we got from, say, 2014 to aiming for a 2025 standard submission?
Sure. After TG2 formed, it was a process of, well, gradually defining and refining the tests. They started with around 99, eventually landing on the 110 core tests we have now. A huge amount of work went into defining the parameters for each test and building the controlled vocabularies the shared dictionaries needed to make it all work consistently.
And there was a key publication along the way.
Yes, Chapman et al. In 2020, summarized a lot of the foundational thinking. They also developed test data sets, which are crucial so people can check if their own implementations of the standard actually work correctly. And, like everyone else, they had to navigate remote collaboration, which added its own challenges.
Right. Leading up to the final push now.
Exactly. With the goal of submitting this standard in 2025, they had key face-to-face meetings in Hobart in 2023 and Seattle in 2024 to really hammer out the final details.
Okay, so that's the journey. Now let's talk foundations. What's BDQ Core actually built on? What are the core ideas?
Well, fundamentally, it rests on the Data Quality Fitness for Use framework. This framework, largely from Vega and colleagues, gives us the language, the concepts, for talking about data quality. Not just is it correct, but is it good enough for a specific job?
So it provides that conceptual underpinning.
Precisely. BDQ Core didn't invent these ideas from scratch. It leverages that existing work. And the core principle within BDQ Core is the suite of tests and the resulting assertions.
Assertions being the statements about quality that come out of the tests.
Exactly. And these tests and assertions are specifically designed for evaluating data described using Darwin Core, which is the lingua franca for biodiversity data.
And where did the specific tests themselves come from initially?
As we touched on, they started by looking at what was already being used in practice. They identified and incorporated tests that were actively running at those major data aggregators.
Yeah.
It was a very pragmatic, grounded approach, making sure it was relevant from day one.
Got it. So grounded in practice, built on a solid framework. Now let's get into the structure. What does BDQ Core actually look like? What's in the box?
Okay, so the heart of it is 110 tests designed for single records. Apply them one record at a time.
110. Any plans for looking across multiple records?
Yes, the standard acknowledges that's important too. So while the current 1 in 10 are single record, it includes templates for developing multi-record tests down the line. Things like checking for outlier coordinates within a data set, for example.
Okay. And these 110 tests, are they all doing the same kind of check?
No, they fall into 4 main categories, each with a different job. The biggest group, 72 tests, is validation.
Validation. Sounds like checking if things are correct.
Pretty much. Checking if values in Darwin Core fields follow the rules, meet expected formats, comply with standards. Basic data hygiene, you could say. Assessing quality in that sense.
Okay, 72 validation tests. What's next?
Next up is issue. There are only 4 of these. They used to be called notifications. These flag things that look potentially problematic, things that probably need a human to take a look.
So, not necessarily wrong according to the rules, but suspicious.
Exactly. An anomaly, maybe? Something worth investigating further. It's less of a pass-fail and more of a, check this out flag.
Makes sense. What's the third type?
That's amendment. There are 29 of these. These actually suggest ways to improve the data. They might propose corrections or standardizations for certain values based on defined logic. It's about actively trying to enhance the data quality.
Okay, suggesting fixes. And the last category.
Finally, measure. There are 5 measure tests. These are a bit different. They provide statistical summaries about the results of the other tests.
Like how many records failed a certain validation test.
Exactly that sort of thing.
Right.
Or calculating the percentage of records with a specific issue. One of them also specifically calculates the duration of an event, if that's in the data. So they give you a higher level view of quality across a data set.
Validation, issue, amendment, measure. A pretty comprehensive set. Who actually wrote the code for these tests?
The report notes that Paul Morris, one of the key TG2 members, independently coded essentially all of them except those measure tests, which naturally rely on the outputs of the others. That's a huge piece of work.
Definitely. And how do people know if they've implemented these tests correctly in their own systems?
That's where the validation data comes in. For every single BDQ core test, there's a set of sample records with known expected outcomes.
Ah, so you can run your code against their data and see if you get the same results.
Exactly. It's crucial for making sure everyone's applying the test consistently. Consistency is key for the whole standard to work.
Absolutely. Now, standards like this live and die by clear definitions. You mentioned vocabularies earlier. What are the really core ones for BDQ?
Right, vocabularies are fundamental. There are two main ones. First, the BDQ core tests and assertions vocabulary itself. Its namespace is BD core. This is what implementers use. It defines each test, the possible results, the assertions, and it's what consumers of the test outputs need to understand.
So that defines the tests and results. What's the other main one?
The other is the fitness for use ontology, namespace BDQ FFDQ. This provides the bigger picture, the semantics, the underlying concepts of data quality, fitness for use. It's the conceptual framework made machine readable, in a sense.
Okay, those are the big two. Are there others that support them?
Yes, several supporting controls vocabularies. There's the BDQ controlled vocabulary list of terms, BDQ, for general terms used in the test descriptions. The one for data quality dimensions, BDDIM, defining things like name, space, time, other dimensions of quality. There's also one for data quality criteria, BDQ CRIT, and one for data quality enhancements, BDQuen, defining specific criteria and amendment types. They all add precision.
It sounds incredibly thorough on the definition side. Where can people find all this documentation, the standard itself?
It's all being finalized now, aiming for that late April 2025 submission. But the drafts and all the ongoing work are publicly available on GitHub. The main entry point is linked in the TG2 report, specifically under the review section of the TDWG-BDQ repository.
So it's all out in the open. What kind of documents are there?
It's pretty comprehensive. There's an intro, a quick reference guide, very handy, a user's guide on how to interpret results, and a detailed implementer's guide for the tech folks, plus the validation data we talked about, all the vocabulary definitions, and other supporting bits.
And if someone wants to cite this standard or link to it officially?
There's an official IRI that's like a stable web address. It's https://www.tdwg.org standards BDQ. That's the permanent link to use for citations, documentation, everything.
Perfect. Okay, we've covered the history, the foundations, the structure. Now the really big question. What does all this mean? What are the implications of BDQ Core for the people creating data, the people using it?
This is the payoff, really. The hope is that BDQ Core will lead to, well, fundamentally better, more reliable biodiversity data overall. By having a standard way to test and report quality, it should increase trust and enhance the credibility of the data providers and aggregators.
And for the user, the researcher, the conservationist, the student?
For them, it means a clearer, more consistent way to judge if data is actually fit for their needs. Right now, assessing fitness for use can be tricky, inconsistent. BDQ Core aims to provide standard metrics and flags. So, less guesswork, more informed decisions about which data to use, and more confidence in the results.
It sounds like it could really help connect different data sets, too.
Absolutely. That's a huge potential benefit. Standard tests, standard vocabularies. It means different systems can talk the same language about data quality. That should make it much easier to combine data from different sources, compare results, and just generally improve interoperability across the board.
And does having these defined tests make automation easier?
Yes, significantly. Once you have a standard suite of tests, it becomes much more feasible to build automated quality checking and reporting tools. This could really streamline things for data publishers and make it quicker for users to get a quality snapshot of large data sets.
This standard isn't static, though, is it? What happens after it's ratified?
No, it needs to evolve. The plan is crucial. Establish a BDQ Core maintenance group after ratification. Their job will be to keep the standard alive, address issues found in practice, clarify things, maybe add new tests or updates as the field changes. Keep it relevant.
And if people want to learn more or get involved?
Well, the report mentions a planned presentation on BDQ Core at the Living Data 2025 conference in Bogota. That sounds like a prime opportunity to hear the latest, ask questions, and connect with the community around it.
Okay, so let's wrap this up. We've gone from the early ideas back in 2010 through the hard work of TG2, understanding the fitness for use foundations, digging into the 110 tests across validation, issue, amendment, and measure, and seeing how crucial those vocabularies are. And now, looking at the potential impact.
Exactly. It's about improving the data itself, but maybe more importantly, improving our understanding and use of that data. For you, the listener, knowing about BDQ Core gives you a new lens to evaluate the biodiversity information you encounter, a tool to be a more critical, more effective user.
So here's a thought to leave you with as BDQ Core heads towards becoming official. How could having these standardized ways to measure and talk about data quality actually change how you find, assess, and use biodiversity data in your own sphere? Imagine a future where quality isn't just hoped for, but it's a standard, transparent feature of the data itself. What new possibilities might that open up? It really feels like a significant step forward for the whole field.
Well, that's it, guys. I'll just plug the other microphone.
Hopefully it'll work. Can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, well, as you probably picked, there were a few hallucinations in there, but pretty minor in all, actually. I was pretty impressed with how it went about it. So I hope that was reasonably informative for everyone. I'm just going to throw it open really now for questions and comments.
Lee, if I quickly kick it off, one of the other things that we didn't mention in that is the all the external vocabularies that we need to link to, that the tests, etc., link to, and they're another important aspect of the whole standard, in that we rely on external people to maintain a lot of external vocabularies. For example, GBIF with things like the vocabularies for sex, and then vocabularies for datums, etc. So they're important as well.
Yeah, John, do you want to say anything about that?
About the vocabularies?
Yeah.
I can't promise anything from GBIF's perspective, but they are invested in a vocabulary server, a place to house community vetted vocabularies. And so that seems like a good solution for people in general. And so some of the vocabularies are hard because basically what we're starting with is the set of all values that people use in the real world. And then we try to take those and turn them into values that are more standardized, so that at the one level, we would have a suggestion of values to use that would be unambiguous. That if you use the value, you would know that it meant something in particular, with definitions and everything. But then there's a layer around it of mappings of things that people use to the things that really are well defined. And that's a big deal. It's kind of going from what we've done in the past and trying to turn it into rigorously the same things when we use particular values. But again, GBIF's vocabulary server seems like a really good platform to try and build that around. And then, and as a kind of practical way to get the consensus on things. And then once it's used in practice and tested in practice, if we want to, and if there's value in doing so, as a community, we can take those and turn them into TADWIG standards and say, look, we've done all this work, and now we agree that the controlled vocabulary for a particular thing is the following. With that in place, we have an infrastructure around it that can build the capacity to have alternate labels in different languages, which is much harder to do if we don't already have the terms defined and things like that. So I think the future of vocabularies of values looks bright, And it's a really big missing piece for a lot of these tests, especially the ones that we had to decide weren't implementable yet. No, because great, if we had a vocabulary, we could do it, but we don't have a vocabulary for it.
Yeah, thanks, John. That was really useful. Uh, it emphasizes the problem we had at the start of TG2, that we were defining quality, but we had based the work on Darwin Core, which was quite open-ended by intent. The unintended consequence, I guess, was the very problem of the lack of control on things like the vocabularies, and hence the TG4 group. But what GBIF's done is certainly a massive step in the right direction for us to get a better handle on quality. Any other comments, questions?
I have a related comment. I don't want to stifle any questions, but the related comment is something that was kind of understated in the podcast. It was definitely there, but you could easily have missed it. And that it is that data quality has no place without a use, a particular purpose. And so you can't say that something has quality without saying why and what is it you're going to use it for. And so there's a whole level of the work that was done that describes use cases and says, here is a particular thing that we want to be able to use the data for, and then making the list of all the tests that need to be there to assure that that's the case. And so in the work that was done for the standard, there were several use cases built, but there are essentially an infinite number of them that could be built. And so as people come up with a particular use case and can define what tests must be there for it, it will immediately become clear what new tests have to be developed. And there will already be a pattern for how to do that. And there will already be a rigor for the kinds of things that you have to consider, and a definitive rigor, if you want to say that you're compliant with a standard, about how that's expressed. And of course, that'll help everybody once they get used to using the standard, because any new test will come in basically ready-made for understanding.
Thanks, John. Good point. Any use case has multiple tests, and any test has multiple use cases. Any other comments? Brickbats? Is there any holes? That summary, the AI summary, was pretty light. Certainly didn't go into detail in a number of different areas.
Maricela, you've got a question?
Oh yeah. I have a comment and a question. I thought I'm completely new to this working group. I just got the working sessions email and I saw data quality and was kind of interested. And I thought the podcast recap was pretty useful for someone who didn't really is unfamiliar with what the group has done so far. And yeah, but also lots of questions to follow up with about different pieces of it. I guess one of the first things that I question about is like, how exactly do you envision this being implemented? Like, is it going to be the responsibility of publishers to like test like GBIF data that they publish, or is it going to be data users that like download something from GBIF and then they're able to run these tests on like a subset of data of interest?
Quick answer is all of the above.
Okay.
We would like to actually see it implemented as close to capture as possible. Seeing a lot of that, in fact, well, increasingly it's being automated. It would be an ideal time to capture the problems right at the point of data capture. But anywhere down the data stream after that is certainly applicable.
Okay. So is this going to be like baked in to database software like specify, or like would data publishers, like collections managers, have to kind of do this separately.
Yeah, Arthur, you want to comment?
What we're hoping for is that a lot of this the standard will be implemented at the museum herbarium level early on. In setting up, we've created a set of code that we can test the implementation with, and that's been done at the in Boston. But we've set it up with the test database so that if you can implement it into your database, all the specifications are there for each test. And if you can put it into your software to test the data, then you can run it against the test database to see if all the fails fail and if all the passes pass, basically, so that you can test the data, to test your implementation against the data. We would like in future for places like Specify and some of the big database producing companies to put the tests into their own software so that all the people using the same software can use it. And we're also hoping that groups like the Living Atlas community, if one of them implements it, it'll be able to be much more easily implemented by the others in that community. But yeah, but and we're hoping that, well, GBIF will probably implement some, maybe not all. You don't have to implement all the tests, but best if you do, as many as you can. And then the other aspect we haven't mentioned is the parameters. We have a lot of the tests have parameters, and that means if you're implementing it in your particular area of the world, for example, with elevation, your elevation might only go up to 5,000 meters. So you may want to put your maximum elevation at 5,000 meters rather than the highest point in the world. And so that's possible as well. So the parameters are set then as you're implementing your test into your database system. But broadly, if we can get as many places, museums, etc., implementing the tests early on into their systems, we don't have to wait for feedback from organisations like GBIF or the Atlas of Living Australia to feed back to the individual museums all the possible errors in the data. They can be fixed up at the source before that data is made available internationally.
Okay, gotcha. Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Arthur. Any other questions or comments? I've put a link to the homepage of BDQ Core in the chat window. As I've said in there, John is actually reviewing it and editing it at the moment. And that should be finished reasonably soon. Any comments, certainly to Arthur, John or I, if you do run across something that may need clarification or you find a problem. If you are going to have a look at it, it'd be certainly appreciated, any feedback.
So one comment there.
Go, John.
Sorry, Arthur. Yeah, that link that Lee put into the chat is kind of the location where the standard, rather the draft standard, needs to be as we review it. And eventually it will have a slightly different home than that if it gets ratified. Part of the whole the environment of TADWIG standards. So it will take on expected forms once it gets to its final destination. But in the meantime, it'll have to be reviewed kind of in the way that we've presented it there. And so Lee mentioned that I'm doing some editing. I'm fairly confident that almost all of it's done, with exception of a few documents. And the documents that I'm working on are the ones that are supplemental, not the ones that are core to everything, with one exception. I still have to edit the ontology. And so, but the only effect that will have will be on details inside of the definitions of some of the internals of the ontology terms. It won't change any structure, no tests will change, the whole list, all the lists will be the same. So in a sense, it's ready for review unless you're keen on whether there are any spelling mistakes inside the ontology, for example.
Yeah, thanks, John. John's just raised an interesting little point too. There are two really components of the documentation you see there is the normative component, which is the formal part of the standard, and the non-normative component, which effectively provides let's just call it a additional information or a context or something like that, and it's not formally a part of the standard. But some of the documents will have sections which are specifically labeled as normative and non-normative, but some documents are normative and some are non-normative.
I've posted a link to our wiki in the chat there. On the wiki, you'll find a lot of the documents, reference to Vega et al. On the original framework, the paper that we wrote in 2020, Chapman et al., and a lot of other documents, our reports to the TADWIG executive, as well as a link to that landing page are in there. So it's a good place to get a bit of more background if you want some more background as to how the task group worked and how it linked to the other task groups in the interest group.
Thanks, Arthur. And over the next maybe a couple of days, I'll add some other documents into that wiki area that have actually come as the result of applying the AI to a lot of the documents. You might find it interesting. There's like FAQs and even a study guide, for heaven's sakes, and it's actually not badly done. Anyway, I'll add those to the wiki. Any other comments? Questions?
Yes, I have a small comment. So first I want to say that thank you for all the work you have done. Every person, every aggregator have this problem with data quality. So we're always thinking of how we do this, So I'm really happy that it's like you are finally in the closing stage. We haven't been part of this group, but we have been watching you for a couple of years. We don't have the technical capacity to implement some of these tests right now. So I think we are probably wait for someone to implement in a programming language that is similar to the things we're using, the RWE Python, R, or something like that. So we can start using it in SIP Columbia in a more frequent way. So always that someone say that about data quality, I say, okay, there are people that are already working in this data quality. We don't have to reinvent the wheel from zero. It's a lot of things to process when you enter to this GitHub from the task group. There are a lot of things that you can read that the test. So I just want to say thank you. I hope that in the next months or years that more implementations start to pop up and we can have some easy implementation for users, I mean, people in the herbariums or the collection have more of technical abilities, but there are people that are just taking data, and it's not their main focus. So if you tell them to, okay, run this through this test and download this specific software, or in Python, they're going to say, it's not feasible for me to do this additional. So maybe we at the node level or the country level, we can do it for them, and at least giving these suggestions for the future. Like, okay, think on that we found this in your data, so you can improve it in the next. So there is that, and I hope to see you in Bogota.
Thank you, Esteban. Yes, it was pretty obvious from the video that we started in 2014 and it's now 2025. So 11 years, basically. We're getting very close to it in October, I would imagine. Yeah, I think Paul's code is Java, correct, John?
That's correct. Yep. It's all Java libraries.
Yeah, Java libraries. So that's a start. But originally, probably under previous directors, there was a undertaking by GBIF that they would implement it. When I spoke to Tim, I guess it's more than a year ago now, he said, well, we may not implement every test, but we will definitely implement the structure that you guys have developed for those tests. And the ALA, by the way, the Atlas of Living Australia, did make a similar and more recent undertaking that it would implement it. What code is going to be used for that, I have no idea. But I guess that's one thing we would really value from the maintenance group to keep up with the implementations. Thanks again, Esteban. That's much appreciated.
One thing we will be looking for, Esteban, is people to review the documents and the standard where they can. And we'd be very hopeful that somebody from the Colombian group would do that, because we know that how up you are on a lot of these aspects.
I will try. We will try. I cannot promise anything with living data coming to October, but we have to for sure at least do a general look of it. And thank you very much.
Any other comments, questions?
I know John will be in Bogota, and I am now hoping that I will be as well. So. While Leah's off walking Japan.
Yeah, my timing is terrible. Booked and paid for about 5 months ago. Anyway, if there's no other questions.
Well, Seth, have you got any questions? People disappearing.
I was hoping Javier was going to be here from the ALA, but he don't think he showed up.
No. Did you have any questions there, David, or Seth?
Thank you all. First of all, for the work. I've been looking at the GitHub you guys sent. It's a lot of documents. We'll go ahead and take a look at it. I come from a hardware company, a startup that we're looking to make affordable sensors for agroecology. So it's my first time with one of these working groups, and yeah, happy to review and have any input. As you mentioned, it would be nice to have it closer to the actual data source, and that's part of what we're trying to do, make high quality data from the hardware onwards. And so it's a pleasure. But at the moment, I guess I have a lot of homework to do.
It's nice having someone like you on board, David. That's exactly what I was hoping for. Okay.
I guess. Oh, sorry.
Oh, Marcella?
I have one more question. That's kind of specific to the test. I'm just kind of curious. I think, well, I used to work at the Academy of Sciences in the Paleo collection, just like for context. And I think a lot of our data quality issues were around taxonomy. So I guess I was just wondering if there's any tests for taxonomy. Yeah, because that's a really
Sadly,
hairy
yes.
topic. Okay. How did you, okay. How did you do that? I don't know if this is the right like time to get into that, but I'm very
Right.
curious about that. Yeah.
Arthur, do you want to make a comment?
Tests internally, the tests are divided into 4 groups. There's the time type tests. There are space type tests, latitudes, longitudes, elevation, etc. And there's taxon type tests. And the 4th one is others like license, etc. So there's a whole group of tests related to taxa and taxonomy. And they were not easy. And it's one of the tests, or some of these tests are the ones that are parameterized. So we're following the GBIF taxonomic backbone as the vocabulary that we look at. Many of the tests have what we call a source authority. So if it's looking out to see if that test, that name or whatever, is it within the source authority, and if it is, then it is compliant to the test. If it's not compliant. So we've used the GBIF backbone taxonomy for that.
But that's
there
just
are
as a
other tests.
default, Arthur, isn't it?
Yeah, as the
It can be
default.
changed.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. And there are some other tests, for example, looking at taxon rank, and that looks at other GBIF vocabularies. Many of them are parameterized so that, for example, well, the example I know best is if you're in Australia, you don't want to look for all the names in the whole world. You want to look for that name if it occurs within Australia, for example. So you can use the Australian lists of names to test that. So you can put that in as your source authority, so it looks for in that vocabulary for the names that you're looking for. But there are quite a few tests. I can't do a quick look now, but I don't know, I can't remember, Lee, how many tests there are for taxon, but there are quite a few tests, and there are quite a few tests that are amendments as well, so that if it could easily fix it, it will suggest a possible change. We don't make any changes with the amendments. It's only a suggestive thing. So it suggests that a change, and you can accept that and put it in your database or not. We do strongly recommend that people don't overwrite things in their database, that they add another field, etc.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Yeah, those are probably 2 of the big problems. I think for us too, it also get issues with like geologic time and taxa, and also geologic taxa versus like living taxa. But yeah, that's cool that you're able to tackle the kind of like the namespace and the backbone problem.
With paleontological stuff, you can, if you had a database of names in your particular area, you could use that as your source authority rather than going to the GBIF one. So that might make a subset or whatever for your own particular use. So that's possible with the parameterization of many of those tests.
That's awesome.
Just put a link in the chat window, which has the name tests. There's 27.
Great. I'll take a look at that. Thank you.
And you can go in there and filter it any way you like, by the way. The 110 tests are now identified with the GitHub tag core, C-O-R-E. You'll see it when you want to do the filter. So you can go in there and filter the tests any which way you want. The one thing we didn't
they are
mention,
undisclosed at the moment, but
yeah, I've got that covered in there. the thing that wasn't mentioned, but it could be relevant, is there is a suite of tests that we labeled as supplementary, so they're not a part of the core tests in the TADWIC standard. These were tests that we thought had some potential in some environments, and the reason they're documented in there is that we thought they may be useful templates for some communities to consider implementing, and some of the taxonomic name ones would certainly be possibilities in certain circumstances.
Not to
We
mention
had lots
that we spent a lot of work to try and to implement them and decide whether they had to be core or not. So yeah, all the thinking's there up to the point where we stopped. I put another link in, which is where in the actual standards documentation, the taxon tests are.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, thank you.
There's another group which have got a special meaning too, just as a heads up. It's called Do Not Implement. It's they're the classic case of unintended consequences. Let's just say they may look easy to implement, but when you really get down to it, there be dragons, so to speak. So yes, there's a few tags in there that are along those lines. The last one is immature incomplete, which I think hopefully speaks for itself.
Yeah, some of those are the ones, immature, incomplete, are ones where there is no vocabulary available to check the things against. And so if somebody creates a good vocabulary for that particular area, then that test could be made a good test and become core. There'll be a process set up for how that can be done in the future as part of the maintenance group. But there are quite not a lot, but there are some tests there that we just said that weren't at a stage at the moment to be classed as a core test because there was just no vocabulary to check things against.
Yep. We call it a day, a morning, an evening.
We've got down to very few people listening now anyway.
That's true. Well, just to finish off. Yep.
For posterity, it's nice to have your update as a recording, and people might be tuning in that way as well. So thank you. I thought this was great.
Thank you, Erica, and thanks for setting it up for us and looking after us. Us old people. Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending. I hope it was useful, but please let me know if there's something that you would like to know more about and can't find. Okay.
Stop the recording. With John, is there anything you and Lee and I want to discuss while we're still online?